Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our UNA New York book talk. I'm Ann Nickel with the United Nations Association of New York. And today we're very pleased to have with us Kati Marton, author and biographer and friend of UNA New York. Dr. Franz Baumann, former Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations, will also join us as our moderator and will be in conversation with Kati. Currently, Dr. Baumann is visiting research professor at NYU, and he reviewed Kati Marton's new book, The Chancellor, in the Los Angeles Review of Books last fall. Kati Marton is an award-winning former news correspondent for NPR and ABC News. She was born in Hungary and was educated in the United States and France at the Sorbonne. The last time she was with us, she discussed the legacy of her late husband, Ambassador Richard Holbrooke. And today we will have a conversation about her new book on Angela Merkel, the Chancellor. The book has already been translated into 15 languages. And it is an extraordinary achievement and a page-turner biography of a very private woman. So before I hand over the proceedings to Franz, I'd like to say that we will have a Q&A after the presentation, and you can write your questions at the bottom of the screen. So a very warm welcome to Kati Marton and Franz Baumann.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be back at the UN, even in virtual form. So thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me a chance to speak to Franz, who is the best possible interlocutor, and a rather formidable one, a challenging one. I'm sure this is going to be a lively conversation because Franz knows German politics inside and out, so he's not going to let me get away with anything. But it's great to be with you, Anne, and Franz, and of course the UN is my second home, so I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you, Kati, for your kind words. Franz, please begin.
Yes, thank you so much, Anne, for putting us together, for organizing this event, for getting me to speak to Kati. We have never met in person. Hopefully we will soon. And I was so intrigued about the subject and of course about the book that Kati wrote that I was very happy when I was asked by the Los Angeles Review to review it. So Kati calls her book a human rather than a political portrait. And it is utterly fascinating, full of details, not gossipy facts, but telling fine points that shed light on a remarkable woman, her style, her stamina, her strategies, and her successes. In November 2005, the German Bundestag voted Angela Merkel Chancellor. She was the first and so far the only woman. She was at 51 years old. She was the youngest person ever. And she received 397 votes against 202, which is more than any of her predecessors or of her successor. Now, Kati wrote the book, we'll hear about it for the last couple of years, but she submitted the manuscript sometime in 2021 early, so about 11 months before Angela Merkel stepped down. So it is a portrait of a four-term chancellor. It is not about her political successes, but it is about the person and the woman. And what comes through very clearly is that Angela Merkel was a counterforce to ignorance and bluster, and that the free world will surely miss her now that she's gone. So she was cautious, she was trustworthy, she was pragmatic, she was seemingly always in control. So this is the Angela Merkel that the world has seen over the last 16 years. And that is the Angela Merkel that comes through very strongly, forcefully, and with great nuance and details that I, as a German and as an avid newspaper reader, did not know. So it's actually full of interesting details, not gossipy, but interesting points that bring to light a very important person, historical figure. Unimaginable that in the Chancellery in Berlin, you would have Friday night, Friday afternoon wine parties, as we have in some other government seats at the moment. What is also interesting, and then I will ask my first question to you, Kati. What I found also very interesting, that you write, and it's true, that no tell-all book has appeared from anybody of her inner circle who has left, or very few people have actually left, they're still with her, so that she inspires the kind of loyalty that nobody has anything actually to gossip about. So what I just to start us out, Kati, if you don't mind, is can you tell us a little bit how you chose the subject and how did you go about unearthing Angela Merkel?
So what a great introduction, Franz. Thank you so much. But by the way, before I answer your question, let me just say regarding your allusion to Boris Johnson's travails about the Friday night booze parties, Angela Merkel, one of the many surprises in my book, Angela Merkel really likes to have a good time, and she likes to stay up late with a drink or two. This was a shock to Tony Blair, for example, and to many others, that she's often the last person to leave whatever the occasion is, and she really does enjoy her wine. So there's another stereotype that I completely dismantle, that she's not this straight-laced puritanical person at all. And by the way, she is great fun. She has a killer humor. I interviewed the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, who said she's funny as hell. That was one of my early interviews. And I thought, wow, there's a lot about Angela Merkel that I don't know and that the world doesn't know. And so I set out to pierce that iron facade of hers. And I don't mind telling you, this is my 10th book, Franz, and by far the most challenging one to write, because she is so private. She did not want this or any other book that goes beyond, the boring, dry facts of her political life in Germany, which frankly is of minimal interest to people outside the Berlin bubble. And I wanted to write a character study of this remarkable, now historic figure, because since she left the Chancellery a few weeks ago, she has entered history. And she leaves a transformed country, but she did it all so quietly that Germans weren't even fully aware of the extent to which she has transformed their society. So she's not a woman who wants credit for what she achieves. And it's remarkable how much you can get done if you don't take credit for it. And I'm very enthusiastic about my subject, but I have spent 5 years kind of living inside her head, trying to, figure her out. And I had a couple of advantages. One was, let's start with the obvious fact, I'm a woman. Although this is my first book about a woman, I do come at this subject with some understanding of the challenges involved in a woman tackling a male culture. And the German political culture was very much a male domain. But not only was she a woman taking on the men of the CDU and the Bundestag, but she was from the East. And she was, I also grew up in a communist country, in Hungary, which also gave me insights into her character, which I'm sure we'll get to, and the power of her foundation. That having been raised in the police state, the Stasi state, she was very super cautious and distrustful. But so I had those advantages, a woman from the East, but she was also a scientist. So her background until age 35, so she was not a child. I was a child when my parents rescued me from Soviet-controlled Hungary. But she was 35 when she first crossed from East to West and completely reinvented herself as a politician and as a West German. But every inch of the way was a struggle. But she never let on, because she has this supreme self-control, self-discipline, which drove the demagogues that she faced across the table, from Putin to Erdogan to Trump to Orban, drove them crazy, because she is impenetrable and you cannot get a rise out of her. Trump tried everything. Putin tried everything to shake that indomitable, steely composure of hers, which worked so well in negotiations.
I mean, you make that point very clear, that Merkel always makes a point of being on time, and she engages, and which I find also very interesting, that she never, in public at least, speaks negatively about anyone, least about her adversaries. Very interesting, and you mentioned Putin, and there is something that I would find very interesting to hear your views. So the world is facing a dangerous crisis of Putin blackmailing the EU, NATO, and the US, threatening a military invasion of Ukraine. In your book, Putin features actually quite prominently. Can you tell us a little bit more about Angela Merkel's interaction with Vladimir Putin throughout the years and the various crises?
It's her, Franz, it's her longest running dysfunctional marriage. They were locked in this relationship for 30 plus years. And you know what? You raise Ukraine, and we are at the edge of something that could be extraordinarily dangerous for the world. And I think that Putin is testing the will of not only the EU, but of the West in general, so Washington as well, in a post-Merkel era. Because you notice that it isn't Putin who's at the negotiating table. He sent a deputy foreign minister. With Merkel, it was always Putin. Merkel was the only head of state that he really had respect for. And, you know, they're products of the same formation, the Soviet socialist formation. They literally speak each other's language, because he, having been a KGB officer in East Germany, in Dresden, speaks fluent German, and she had to learn Russian growing up in Soviet-controlled East Germany. So they speak each other's language. They have a perfect understanding of each other, and a kind of a grudging respect as two time-tested warriors. And he knew that he couldn't get away with anything with her, because she was always so well prepared. She has a photographic memory, so she was always meticulously prepared for their negotiations. She once said, when she was in the Ukrainian in 2014, during Putin's first aggression into Ukraine, she said, "I know every tree in the Donbass," and that's really not an exaggeration. I mean, she would arrive to these meetings in Minsk and call him out on every inch of territory. And when he would, spin his fantastic lies, which made President Obama give up on him early on and said, that man just lies to me day and night. I can't deal with this. And Merkel said, well, he lies to me too. but of course, Ukraine is closer to Berlin than it is to Washington. So she didn't have the luxury of saying somebody else deal with this. So Merkel, during the first Ukrainian incursion, really represented the West and did it nobly, and she was indefatigable and succeeded in freezing that conflict. And in her mind, Franz, an imperfect deal, a cold peace, is better than armed conflict. In her mind, armed conflict is the absolute failure of diplomacy. And she's not a pacifist, but she does believe that if you talk long enough, you can find a deal. A deal is to be found if you just stay with the talks until, you know, she said at one point during the Ukraine crisis that the only way she knew the time of day was whether they were serving bread and jam or a roast. So that is the level of her focus, which I attribute to her training in science, where you drill down and where facts and evidence are the basis, not BS, which is what we generally get from politicians. She is her ability to marshal detail and facts are unmatched and unbeatable. And I fear that, well, we're about to find out if in the post-Merkel era in the EU particularly is going to have such a dedicated negotiator on our behalf.
Yeah, but of course, even when she was there, you had the annexation of the Crimea, you had the sponsored war in eastern Ukraine, you had the shooting down of the Malaysian aircraft, you had the poisoning, you had the Navalny situation, you had the contract killing of a man in Berlin. And
yes, yes, Franz, she is not a magician. She didn't make Putin into a good guy, a decent guy. You know,
I was leading to a question whether your book, you told me before we came on air, that your book has now been translated into 24 languages or more. Is a chance that it will come out in Russian? Because I would find it
has already.
It has already. How wonderful.
Yes. I sold the Russian rights some while ago, as well as the Chinese, as well as the Hungarian, which is important to me since I'm from Hungary and since Orban is such a menace and continues to make trouble for the EU. But yes, it has been translated.
Well,
I haven't seen any write-ups in Russian, but I know it's been translated. I've done quite a few interviews with Ukrainian media. They, of course, are very interested in Merkel, because Merkel, insofar as Putin's first march into Ukraine was halted, they know that they owe Merkel for that.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So I hope, although I don't speak Russian, my sister does, she's a Russian teacher, I have to get her as an interpreter. When you do your book talk in Moscow,
they haven't invited me.
It would be so interesting to have a discussion from that perspective. But if I may, Kati, can I bring you back a bit to the German scene?
Yes, please.
Several questions on Germany. One is, what in your view were the electoral, the partisan, the diplomatic, and the technical constraints in Germany under which Merkel chafed or labored or acted for the 16 years that she was in power?
Well, as you know better than most people, the German Chancellor is not a powerful executive position, and deliberately the power is diffuse in Germany, thanks in large part to us, the United States. We were the midwife of the German Constitution, and we didn't want another Hitler. We didn't want strong man. So the chancellor really uses persuasion and her stature, and of which Merkel had a great deal. She's also a very canny politician. She is, and here's another surprise to those who think that she's, this goody-goody dignified lady who never does anything untoward. Well, not only is she cunning, she can be ruthless, and so she really she didn't torch her rivals, but nor did she ever run for the fire hose when they were self-immolating. And they generally did self-immolate because they underestimated her every step of the way, starting with her great original mentor who launched her political career, Chancellor Helmut Kohl, whose career she ended literally by writing a very famous opinion piece saying it's time for you to leave Helmut, because he was caught in a kickback scandal. But no one else in her party, the CDU, had the courage to face this titanic figure of Helmut Kohl. But she, Angela Merkel, his protege, because after all, it was Kohl who made her first Minister of Women and Youth after only 1 year in politics. Merkel was a newcomer, and then gave her a much more serious portfolio as Minister of Environment. So she owed Kohl a great deal. But when it came down to choosing between her personal loyalty to Kohl or saving the party, and thus in her mind, saving Germany, she chose, she did not choose the man, she chose the bigger cause. So she is a very fine political player. And, she took on Gerhard Schroeder, who also treated her with utter disdain. And she famously let him sorry to use this term, mansplain his way out of office, but this famous scene where they were neck and neck in the vote for Chancellor, and they were in a television broadcast, and Schroeder just really kind of imploded and said, "What, you think I'm going to make a deal with this woman?" And the camera then panned to Angela Merkel, whose face was expressionless, and that same expressionless face that drove Trump crazy too, and just let him bloviate on. Let him mansplain his way until it was obvious that he had turned off the German public and had lost. And at that point, she leans into her mic and said, the fact is, Gerhard, you did not win. And that was the end of Schroeder.
Yeah, you're so right. And that was a powerful scene, and Schroeder's terrible mistake, because Angela Merkel at that point did not have the party behind her.
No.
But because of his boorishness, her own conservative people, and in fact, I mean, she did not come in very strongly. It was only 35%. And so they would have been very happy to dump her. So it was, it was Schroeder who self-immolated, and that was fine. But that brings me to my next question, which is, your book makes very clear that Angela Merkel was an accomplished, if low-key, artist of power. And you mentioned her predecessors, Gerhard Schroeder. You also mentioned Helmut Kohl. Now, if you go back, another two chancellors, namely Helmut Schmidt and Willy Brandt, all of whom are identified with momentous achievements, Kohl, unification, and so on. What do you think will Angela Merkel's legacy be?
Okay, thank you for asking that because it's very important. Okay, she, first of all, has transformed Germany into a into a multi-ethnic society by admitting 1 million mostly Middle Eastern refugees, and not only admitting them, but assimilating and making them into mostly productive citizens, with very few exceptions. No other head of state in Europe during the greatest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War, the mass migration from the never-ending wars of the Middle East, which Germany, as you know, had very little to do with starting. We, the United States, had much more to do with starting them, but we were not so generous in accepting this human flood. She, when she in the summer of 2015 said, "Wir schaffen das," in her supremely low-key way, "We can handle this, we can manage this." Well, Germans stepped up to it. And 7 million Germans were engaged in helping refugees assimilate in one way or another. And okay, so that's already a huge thing. She also made marriage equality the law of the land. She opened space for women. Her closest advisors were women. Ursula von der Leyen, who was the president now of the European Commission, is also a Merkel protege. And she was, in a time of growing populism, she and threats from many demagogues, she was the anti-demagogue who stood up for the values of the West, rule of law, openness, tolerance, and a belief in the strength of democratic values, which during the 4 Trump years were really at risk. She was the one who stood up for those values. And there's this iconic photograph, it's in my book, of her surrounded by the other leaders of the EU with, facing Trump. And Trump is sitting there with his arms crossed, looking like, you know, show me. And the others, all the other leaders, men, are leaning back, and she is leaning forward. And to me, that really, if ever a picture said 1,000 words, that was it. So, I mean, I could go on, but ultimately, she demonstrated that there is that a woman in power rules differently than a man. It was an ego-free, she practiced the politics without ego. It was never about her. It was about the people that she served. These are, you know, I've been around politicians for a long time. You have too. These are extraordinary qualities, and generally they're not rewarded because we tend to reward charismatic figures. Certainly in our country we do.
No, I grant you this.
Yeah, so it's a new kind of politics. It's a new kind of politics, and it'll take a long time for history to catch up, for the historic record, which, by the way, she will not, unlike Churchill, who, when he was asked, will history be kind to you, he said, yes, because I intend to write it. Merkel will not write her memoirs. I would wager, I would put money on that. She will not, but I think history will recognize her as the anti-demagogue who, when she was asked, what do you love about your country? You know what she said? She said, we have nice draft-proof windows.
Exactly.
I mean, how brilliant is that? And how that demonstrates her wit, and the fact that she doesn't believe Germany's a superior country or culture. She happens to love Germany, it's her country, but she's not going to beat her chest and say, we are the best, we are, So, she set an example for the kind of leadership and the kind of politics that I would hope others would draw lessons from. We need this kind of moderate, tempered, non-narcissistic leaders who are interested in us, not in themselves, who are servants, public servants, not how is it that a Putin, for example, is said to be the third richest man in the world? I mean, how did that happen? We know exactly.
No, I mean, it's very clear if you mention the former American president or the current Russian president or the Chinese president, this is like day and night, and they are not comparing like with like. And
yes, but we have to because we live in the real world.
Yeah, as a German, I'm of course delighted how the election was run, that nobody contested it, that she took her successor to the G20 meeting, introduced him, and it was gracious and it was no nonsense. And
yes,
that there is no discussion on any constitutional cheating, or even, in Germany, you're automatically on the voters' roll. You cannot be not on the voters. Yes. Anyway.
Yes. I think her final great act really was in the manner of her leaving, the dignity of her leaving, demonstrating this is how a democracy is supposed to work.
Yes.
Look
her great sense of
where we are now. I mean,
that she had the Bundeswehr play an East German song. Yes. You forgot the color film. On my holiday, I don't look good in black and white in the bikini or something like that. That's the
but that, by the way, that had huge importance. That the choice of that East German old hit, because she is saying, and I kind of like to think that she's read my book, because I discussed how important her East German origins were, and that she didn't spend enough time kind of embracing her origins, and that has led to some alienation from her fellow East Germans, and also more seriously, it's led to the Alternative für Deutschland doing very well in the East, because because she's this hyper-rational person, she sometimes underestimates people's irrationality. She should have spent more time in East Germany, but here at the end, she chose a couple of East German pop tunes, and it was not by chance. So she was kind of late in the day, but making up for the fact that she hadn't really acknowledged sufficiently the East Germans' struggle, because not everybody was able to adapt as fast as this brilliant Angela Merkel to an entirely new culture and country. I mean, she said that we didn't leave our country, but we were refugees, east to west.
Kati, let me disagree with you a little bit, not about what you just said, but about the legacy, not about that she changed the role of women in German society, European society, and self-evidence and so on.
Yes.
I do, however, think that, there are a number of things. You mentioned the 800,000 Middle Eastern refugees who were admitted into Germany.
Yes.
Things. It is generally forgotten that after the end of the Cold War, or between 1988, when the Soviet Union was collapsing, and 1993, Germany accepted 3.7 million people from the East. So there is
Can I just say something on that? Can I just say that I am talking about 1 million Middle Eastern, mostly Muslim refugees coming in. I'm not talking, I was a refugee myself from East Europe, from Hungary, accepted by the West, for which I'm very grateful. But it was, to accept me and my highly educated parents was one thing. To accept 1 million Middle Easterners when her friend and mentor, Henry Kissinger, accused her of jeopardizing German culture as a result, and warned her against that. And she said, Henry, I had no choice, meaning it was her Martin Luther moment, meaning here I stand, I can do no other. And this is, we haven't talked about her very strong Lutheran faith as the daughter of a Lutheran pastor, but I would put that as important, her Lutheran faith and her strong moral core. I would make that as important in who she is and in her politics as her East German formation, where she learned to keep her own counsel, to not trust, and to be as private as she was, because as an East German, she knew that every third person was an informant. So in a way, it was a good training ground for politics.
Yes. Okay. No, I grant you that, and it was interesting. But there were many aspects of Angela Merkel that are normal politicians. For instance, she declared when she became Chancellor that she wanted to maintain the draft because that was part of the German tradition and the tradition of the army. Within 2 years, the draft was abolished. She said that maintain nuclear power stations for 12 more years, and that was thrown overboard within months. Yes, she supported marriage equality, but voted in censure. She voted.
Yes, which is so, Franz, this is what I'm saying. She is, just as she doesn't call out Xi Jinping when in public, when he knuckles down on Hong Kong or the Uyghurs. She never called out Trump. She never criticizes her enemies her rivals, not enemies, in public. You know what she does? She goes to Navalny's bedside, Navalny poisoned by Putin. At the first person that Navalny saw when he came out of his coma was Merkel. So she doesn't believe in bombast and in public shaming. She believes in gestures. She believes in going to Auschwitz at a time of growing anti-Semitism in the world, and saying this was a German crime for which Germans will pay forever. This is a permanent debt. This is so her style is not the politics of giving big speeches. She's a very poor speaker, but the politics of transforming society by example and by never taking the bait that when Putin famously first met her, he gave her the KGB eye staring test, and who blinks first? Well, he blinked first. Next time they met, he unleashed his dog because he knew that she was afraid of dogs, and she just completely froze. And the whole thing of letting macho men bluster, she pointed out, she made us see not only Putin's weakness but how ridiculous is the male hubris for which Trump's or Putin's or Orban's or any of them. She made us see that without telling us that, because it was so obvious that they were ridiculous and that they were weak, and that this Trump, when Trump threw a candidate at her at a G8, that piece of candy that he fished out of his pocket, and said, "Angela, don't say I never gave you anything." And all her fellow heads of state were shocked. She pretended she didn't notice, and this is, I would urge not only politicians to read this book and learn, as we learn from Machiavelli's The Prince, how to wage war without arms, but anybody who's interested in power, and not only in gaining power, because that's not so tough. I mean, it's not as tough as holding on to power. And she held on to power for a very long time. And the question is how? And what I try to do in this book is not state how, but illustrate how she did that with these revealing anecdotes and eyewitness testimonies, because I was very lucky that I had many of her closest aides. I won their confidence over many trips to Berlin, and not that, I mean, you said, Franz, you said that there's no scandal to be found in her entire history. There really isn't. But what I didn't want to write was a boring book. And I wanted, because I was writing for an international audience, not, as I said, not for the Berlin bubble. And I wanted to, and a statesman who you know well, but who shall remain nameless, said to me after he read my book, he said, "Kati, you've managed to make Mutti interesting." And I said, I didn't make Mutti interesting. Mutti is interesting. And by the way, she's no more Mutti than Helmut Kohl was Fati. It's just that we live still in a male political culture where some men still have a hard time accepting powerful women, and she was the most powerful woman of our time. I think Anne is trying to get through to us.
But I need to ask you one more question. May I, Anne and Carla, do I have time for one more question? Okay. Kati, very interesting. And of course, you make a point in your book that Angela Merkel made a career of being underestimated. And I think, and you say it implicitly, maybe explicitly, I don't remember, that her lack of charisma is what makes her charismatic. But let me tell you,
yes,
I found surprising in your book, in the introduction, page 16, where you say that Merkel is the opposite of an idealist, and
yes,
that she does not believe that the arc of history
yes,
bends towards justice. Now, many
right.
of the other things I found interesting and revealing, but I would have thought Angela Merkel to be tending towards being idealistic and hoping and working towards the world getting better. And now you tell me she doesn't.
Let me just explain that. When I said that she doesn't believe that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, a line that Obama uses, and it's from Dr. King, I meant that she often uses the image of Sisyphus rolling the rock up the mountain, which she doesn't think is a tragic image, even though the rock keeps rolling back. For her, she sees her role as continually rolling that rock up, and never the sort of daily work of salvation. Again, this goes back to her Lutheran roots, but she is very realistic about human beings' capacity for evil, and is so aware of German history. She one reason that she has made Israel's survival a foundational element of Germans' reason for being is that she does believe that this is a permanent debt. So she is not an idealist, nor is she like Henry Kissinger, a pessimist. She just believes that we have to be very open-eyed about people's capacity for and that democracy is frail, is a very tender flower that needs constant tending. And this in her last 2 years as Chancellor, in almost all her speeches, she referred to the fact that other civilizations have flourished and then died from lack of care. And then, of course, what she saw on January 6th in the storming of the Capitol was horrifying to her, and really shook her to the core that Trump may be gone, but Trumpism is alive, and that the big lie on which Trumpism survives is what got Hitler to the Chancellery, the big lie that Germany was stabbed in the back by the Jews and the communists. Yes. So she's very, very clear-eyed about where the United States is at the moment. The United States is a country she deeply admires and reveres, and was shocked by Trump's election, and then B, by the fact that our bastion of democracy, the Capitol, could be stormed by these people. So she, I think it was a terrible shock for her, and I see that Anne is trying to get through to us. So go ahead, Anne.
I'm so sorry.
No.
It's an amazing conversation, but we did promise the audience to ask some questions, and we have some good ones. So I'd like to introduce Carlo Ladd, our communications associate, to the program, who will start off with the questions. Carlo, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Anne, and thank you so much, Kati and Franz, for this really fascinating discussion. We didn't want to cut you off.
No, it's fine.
I'm going to do we have a lot of questions and not very much time, so I'm going to do my best to, a lot of people are asking a few similar questions, so I'm going to do my best to combine. Quite a few people are asking what lessons American girls, women in leadership, women aspiring to be leaders, what can they learn from Angela Merkel's chancellorship?
A lot. So first of all, read my book. Second, follow her example of always being better prepared than the men, because it's still the power is still on their side. Be self-confident without being cocky. When asked who her role model was, she said, myself as often as possible, which shows that she has a very sturdy ego, but she doesn't feel the need to remind people of her own brilliance. So, but there are many more lessons to be had in the book.
Thanks for that. We have a couple of other people asking, basically, is Merkel's time in the public eye and public life finished? She refused a high-level UN assignment today, and a couple of our viewers are wondering what's next for her, whether she is gone for good.
I don't believe she's gone for good, but I never thought that she would take another formal assignment. After you've been Chancellor of Germany for 16 years, what can possibly match that? She's not interested in running anything. I think that after a good rest, and don't forget, this is her first taste of freedom. She was not free for 35 years of living under a police state, and she was certainly not free for the last 16 as Chancellor. So she's going to savor that freedom, and then in her typical way, she will, with her scientist's eyes, she will observe her own reaction to all that freedom. And if she misses being at the table with the powerful, she will have the opportunity to weigh in, and I think it will be on I would predict 2 areas areas where we might hear from Merkel. One is climate change, which is an incomplete a file for her, because her chancellorship of 16 years was a rolling crisis. We didn't touch on the Eurozone crisis, which again she managed, and of course we did talk about the migration crisis and about the Trump years, and then of course the final 2 years of her time, where she was crisis manager during the pandemic. So she did not get to spend much time on something that's very important to her, which is climate. So I think we will hear from her on that subject. I hope so. She has so much to contribute. She's relatively young. And let me just say that she's the first German chancellor to have left on her own steam, not and at her own chosen time, which is another lesson. Know when to leave.
That's fascinating. I hope that she comes to work on climate issues as well.
Yes, and also on women. I think Carlo, if I may, I think she will also spend time on women, particularly African women who are not as empowered as we in the West are. Mm-hmm. I think that's close to her heart too.
Okay, so you talk a lot about her leadership style and how that will be missed. Which current world leader do you feel best carries on that legacy, man or woman?
Wow. Well, I like it. It's not a great day for leaders. There are no giants among us. No. But I certainly admire the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Ahern, and who is kind of a Merkelian figure. Other than Ahern, wow, it's not a time of giants, and boy, do we need them. So let's step up to it, ladies.
This just is me chiming in now, but
yeah.
Here in Italy, there are some people who talk about Mario Draghi, who of course is not.
Oh yes, yes.
Who of course was not elected, so it's an interesting thing.
Right. But you're right. Yeah.
I've mentioned him, so I don't know whether you think that is an overblown comparison.
No, yeah, he seems to be a statesman, and he certainly brought a sober, non-ego-driven politics to the fore, but as opposed to Boris Johnson and Orban and Putin and all the others we've been talking about.
That's really fascinating. So we have a couple of other, I guess, more critical questions here, asking about what Merkel's legacy towards Europe is it mixed, because she often displayed a wait and see attitude and seemed to prioritize German economic interests. For example, and you did talk about this a little bit, but what is your general answer to people who ask whether that maybe ruins her legacy or impacts it negatively?
Look, she has her blind spots. As I said to Franz, she's not a magician. She didn't suddenly transform Putin into a Democrat or Trump into a nice guy. She's a realist. She was dealt a pretty bad hand in terms of her fellow heads of state, and she is a supremely cautious person. And has her several blind spots. One of them, the deal with North Sea, which actually Gerhard Schroeder started, but she has continued. The other was that she wasn't nearly tough enough with people like Orban, who are betraying the EU's fundamental values, and should have been sanctioned sooner. But she one of her favorite lines is the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. So she's calculating, generally errs on the side of caution, but it's never driven by by hubris or ego. It's really a result of cold analysis and calculation, which I think is a welcome relief to most of the world. But yeah, she missed. I say in my books, I don't. This is not a Valentine. This book to Merkel.
Thank you for that answer. We have one spectator here who also says that she read your autobiography and loved it, and is wondering if you found stories or experiences from Merkel's youth that you identified with, and were there ones that were different from your own experiences growing up?
Well, absolutely. Yes, I do identify with her. I too, as I mentioned, I was raised in communist Hungary. I was the child of jailed journalists. I didn't see my parents for 2 years, from the time I was 6 till 8, because they were convicted as CIA agents for the crime of being good reporters. And I did set out in a man's profession as a journalist. It was a field that was very much a male field, and so I faced the usual misogyny. But like, I mean, I can't compare myself to this powerful woman, but I did find that that if I kept my goal in sight, and was undeterred by naysayers and people who doubted me, I generally prevailed. But of course, I'm not a politician. I'm an author, and I have to say, after studying her for 5 years, usually, as I mentioned, this is my 10th book, and usually by the end, I see more deficits in the character that I'm portraying than positives. Not with Merkel. With Merkel, I do find myself these days often asking myself how she would react to certain things, and I think we're going to miss her more with the passage of time, because she was not a looming presence in anybody's, not even in Germany, certainly not in the rest of the world. But her sanity, her sober view of her responsibility toward her people are all so rare, and I think she made it look easier than it is to govern a country like Germany.
So thank you very much, Kati and Carlo. I don't think we have time for any more questions, but
Too bad.
yes, we could go on. Franz, I wanted to ask you if you have any parting words or another question, or from Kati.
Well, thank you again for organizing, Kati. I very much like your responses. We should continue for another 2 hours to talk about German arms exports, climate, the right-wing populist AfD.
Yes, the AfD.
Some people think that this is Angela's child in a way.
It is.
So, no, but thank you so much for all this food for thought. I mean, it's one of the rare books that answers or raises more questions than it answers, and it leads in interesting ways. So I was very happy to spend a lot of time on it, because review, you can't just read it once. You actually have to read it many times. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. And thank you so much for putting us together and for giving me this chance to have this conversation with a very inspiring lady. And I so much support what you're saying, and hope we'll continue it in person at some point.
Yes, thank you.
Me too. Thank you so much, Franz and Anne and Carlo, and I wish I could see all the other people who were on. I wish we were in the same actual space. That would be so nice, and perhaps one day we will be. Let's hope.
So thank you again, Kati and Franz, for this really, truly memorable discussion about Angela Merkel. it was a unique view of a unique woman, and we're very so pleased to have been able to present it today. Those of you who would like to become a member of UNA New York, we would welcome your membership. We are the host city chapter in New York City, so we have a lot of connections to the UN, and you can join us at our UNA-NYC.org. And if you haven't got the book already, it's fascinating. I loved it. It was really good.
Thank
so
you.
you can get it at Barnes & Noble. And Kati, I think you said that it was coming to bookstores January 24th.
Yes, a new, because it's sold out in a lot of places, which is both good news and bad news, in that it takes a while to given all the shipping problems, etc. It'll be January 24th when the bookstores have a new shipment. But I know that it's available at Barnes & Noble and also via Amazon. It's the smaller bookstores that are waiting for the next printing, which will be, I guess, in a week.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Anne, for doing this.
It's a pleasure, great pleasure to see you again. And then our program coming up next week is Careers at the United Nations, which will be a 4-part series, which you will learn how to get a job at the UN, which is, I don't know, maybe impossible, but
it's a great place. It's a great place to work. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.